Welcome to a Miss Marple mystery. On a snowy Christmas Eve, a mysterious hidden room appears in Gossington Lodge. Secrets awaken and conscience is tested. Where are you listening from? Tell us in the comments below. Snow fell gently upon the thatched roofs of St. Mary Mead, dusting the hedgerows in white lace and muffling the crunch of footsteps along the lane. From every cottage window came the soft glow of Christmas warmth. Candles flickering, pudding steaming, carols faintly echoing from the village hall. Yet behind the cheerful preparations of Christmas Eve, something faintly uneasy stirred, a whisper of something out of place. At Gossington Lodge, a stately Georgian home recently purchased by Colonel and Mrs. Lacey's cousins from London, the annual charity carol party was in full swing. Guests in tweed and tartan laughed over cups of steaming punch, while a roaring fire painted the panelled drawing room in golden shadow. Miss Marple, sitting modestly near the mantel, was knitting a pair of blue mittens for the vicar's wife and quietly observing the crowd. She noticed everything: who spoke too eagerly, who avoided whose glance, who looked over their shoulder just a bit too often. "Most pleasant evening, isn't it, Miss Marple?" said Mrs. Weatherby, a large woman in a red shawl handing her a slice of plum cake. "Oh, yes," Miss Marple murmured with a faint smile, her eyes on the tall, stiff man standing near the French doors. A Mr. Roland Derry, if she recalled correctly. There was a nervousness about him, a kind of distracted vigilance, as though he half expected the door behind him to open of its own accord. It did. A sudden draught swept through the room as a cold gust entered. A maid, pale and trembling, stood in the doorway. "Beg pardon, madam," she stammered to Mrs. Lacey, well, there's a room upstairs that wasn't there before." A hush fell over the gathering. Even the gramophone, winding to its end, seemed to die into silence. "A room?" Mrs. Lacey repeated. "What on earth do you mean, Lucy?" "I don't rightly know, ma'am," said the girl, twisting her apron. "It's at the end of the east corridor, where the linen cupboard is. But tonight, there's a door. I swear it wasn't there this morning." Laughter rippled nervously through the guests, but Miss Marple did not laugh. Her needles paused mid-click. Her soft blue eyes, sharp and steady as ice beneath the lace of her hair, met the maid's. "Tell me, my dear," she said quietly. "Was the door locked or open?" "Open, ma'am," whispered Lucy, "and there was a light on inside." For a moment, only the fire crackled. Then Colonel Lacey, ever the soldier, declared, "Nonsense, probably a trick of shadows. Come along, we'll have a look." A small party formed: Colonel Lacey, Mr. Derry, still visibly uneasy, and young Inspector Cray, who had come socially that evening but was quick to assume command. Miss Marple, at Mrs. Lacey's insistence, followed them up the staircase. The east corridor stretched long and dim, lined with portraits of stern ancestors. At the far end, where once had been a blank wall, stood a narrow wooden door painted green. A soft light flickered beneath it. Colonel Lacey turned the handle. The door creaked open. Inside was a small, well-furnished chamber, a sitting room of sorts, with a single armchair, a writing desk, and a faint smell of lilac perfume. Upon the desk lay a photograph of a young woman in Edwardian dress, and beside it a blood-stained handkerchief. Mrs. Lacey gasped. Inspector Cray muttered an oath, but Miss Marple stepped forward, eyes keen. She ran a gloved finger along the dusty mantelpiece. Except it wasn't dusty at all. Someone had been here recently. Her gaze shifted to the photograph. The young woman's face was serene, almost sad. Miss Marple's brows furrowed faintly. "Oh dear," she said softly. "How very peculiar indeed." The room that shouldn't exist was real, and it held a secret that someone in Gossington Lodge had gone to great trouble to hide. The light in the impossible chamber felt warmer than the corridor, as if someone had only just breathed there. Inspector Cray moved around the small desk with feline caution. Colonel Lacey, affronted by mystery in his own house, declared that some forgotten architect must have tucked this room into the eaves. Miss Marple did not argue. She watched Roland Derry instead, the way his gaze clung to the photograph while his hands remained deliberately still, as though any movement might dislodge a memory he preferred to keep pinned. "Who is she?" Mrs. Lacey asked, one gloved hand at her collar. Such a patient face. "Edwardian," Cray said, turning the frame by its edges. The brown paper seal on the back was newly gummed. The photographer's imprint read, "Bath." He unfolded the blood-stained handkerchief beside it. The starburst had dried to rust. Hours old at least, yet Lucy swears the door was not here this morning. Lucy bobbed a frightened curtsy in the doorway. "Truly, sir, I dusted. There was wall." "Walls do not move," Colonel Lacey announced stoutly, "but carpenters do." Miss Marple traced the brass mantel clock, stopped at 12:21. Along the middle of the shelf there was no dust at all. "One places a clock when one wishes a room to seem lived in," she murmured. "Stage dressing?" Cray asked. "Perhaps," she said, "by someone who likes tidy surfaces, and who knows what time can suggest." Mr. Derry gave a short laugh with no mirth in it. "Tidiness can be a form of guilt." "Or of grief," Miss Marple replied, so gently that his eyes flicked toward her and slid away. Cray pocketed the handkerchief and the photograph. "No one touch anything else. Colonel, keep the guests downstairs. Frozen pipes will do." Mrs. Lacey whisked away with Lucy. The men withdrew. Miss Marple lingered, listening. The room held the hush of expectation rather than disuse. A pinch of ash in the grate smelled faintly of lavender. Along the cornice, paint met paper imperfectly. New work, wearing an old costume. On the landing, Cray waited. "Well, Miss Marple, I think the blood does not belong to the lady in the photograph," she said. "People who deceive out of pity prefer letters to stains. Those who wish to frighten prefer stains to letters." Downstairs, carols resumed with brittle brightness. Mrs. Weatherby announced that ghosts walked at Gossington Lodge and that she had always suspected dry rot. Mr. Derry stood half behind a holly bough, staring into his punch as if the surface might advise him. Miss Marple drifted near with the harmless air of a woman considering yarn weights. "You know Bath, Mr. Derry?" she asked conversationally. "A little," he said. "Work keeps me in town." "A friend of mine sent a portrait from Bath to her sailor," Miss Marple mused. "The photographer was famous for smoothing irregularities. Photographs preserve what one wishes others to remember." He stiffened. "What are you getting at?" "Nothing at all," she said. "Only that memory is often edited, and editing leaves fingerprints." Inspector Cray began interviews in the billiards room. Lucy repeated that she dusted the east corridor at 11 and heard faint tapping like a picture nail being driven. Mrs. Lacey's cousins, George and Daphne Allerton, hurried in, anxious and apologetic. They denied knowledge of any hidden sitting room. The east wing, they explained, had been under repair since an autumn leak. Owen Wills, a carpenter from Much Benham, did the work. He and his men had a key while repairs continued. The keys, they said, were returned yesterday. "Reliable men sometimes do unreliable things for a consideration," Cray observed, and sent a constable to fetch Mr. Wills. Miss Marple left them to their alarm and wandered back to the corridor. Space in old houses tells tales. A foot borrowed here becomes a foot missing elsewhere. The linen cupboard at the bend had shallower shelves than last year. Folded damask puckered against stingy depth. She measured with her eye and decided inches had been stolen to make the new room plausible. A faint thread of green paint marked the cupboard hinge. Careless transfer, recent and telling. In the green-walled chamber, she examined the desk. The blotter was new, the paper unused, but the pen nib had been dipped and left to dry, a thin brown crescent at its tip. The drawer slid too smoothly. Within lay a matchbook from a Bath hotel, 3 matches gone. She replaced it and noticed, beneath the skirting, a glint, a small silver button engraved with an anchor, scuffed by use. She did not touch it. She had known a curate's nephew who lost such buttons perpetually from his blazer. He rode and liked people to know it. Back in the hall, the Allertons' butler, old Clegg, stood with gloomy respect. "Beg pardon, ma'am, but when houses pretend to be new, they rattle at night. Last 2 evenings a door went soft-like, not with wind." "Which hour, Mr. Clegg?" "Between 12 and 1, he said. "A cold hour. I keep boiler notes." 12:21, Miss Marple said, almost to herself, thinking again of the clock and of people who stage scenes as well as rooms. Mr. Wills arrived pink with frost and indignation. He allowed that he had boxed a recess, repaired damp, and papered the corridor. He denied knowledge of secret sitting rooms. "No one pays for extra corners at Christmas," he said. "They pay for straight lines." "Yet someone paid for sentiment," Miss Marple told him kindly. "And sentiment is seldom straight." By the time the hall had emptied to candle ends and fallen needles, the house felt as if it were listening to itself. Mrs. Lacey, pale and practical, pressed sandwiches on the inspector. Colonel Lacey fortified the evening with whiskey. Miss Marple stood at the foot of the staircase and considered the plain facts that are never plain. A room had appeared where none was, dressed to seem long remembered, holding a portrait of waiting, a lavender smell, a stopped clock, and a theatrical handkerchief. Its maker either wished to comfort someone or to trap them by giving the past a door and a chair. She went quietly to Mr. Derry, who was putting on his coat with deliberate care. "Do you mean to sleep tonight?" she asked. He looked at her as if startled awake. "I rarely do." "Then you might as well hear the midnight carols," she said, "and listen for doors that move when they are told not to." The midnight carols dwindled into a hush that seemed to make the candles taller and the corridors longer. In that hush, Miss Marple noticed the way Mr. Derry's gaze kept returning to the staircase, like a man listening for a name he dreaded to hear. Inspector Cray had posted a constable at the foot of the stairs and another by the east passage, and Colonel Lacey, gruff with dignity and drink, declared that the matter would keep till morning. But houses with secrets do not keep ordinary hours, and Gossington Lodge had acquired the habit of breathing between the strokes of midnight. "Have some coffee, Miss Marple," Mrs. Lacey urged, pressing a cup into her hand. "Cold goes through old bones." "It does, my dear," Miss Marple said, accepting with a smile, "though I have known a cup to make mischief talkative." She sipped and watched the frost fern along the panes, and with it the reflections of faces. Anxious, stubborn, foolish, calculating. The room appeared again in her mind. The meek lamp, the stopped clock, the theatrical handkerchief, and now that empty rectangle on the desk where a photograph had so obviously lain a little while before. If a person wished to conjure memory, he would be tidy about it. Sentiment, when deliberate, is precise. Inspector Cray reappeared from the green door with a small notebook and an air of offended patience. "No fresh footprints," he told Colonel Lacey, "save what Salt tells us. Someone came directly from the hall after the carols. A quick step, not heavy." "Young?" the Colonel suggested. "Not necessarily," Miss Marple murmured. "Anxious feet can be light. Pride makes them heavy." Cray gave her the ghost of a bow. "We will treat the East Corridor as a scene. No one passes without my say-so. In the morning I will interview everyone again, beginning with the servants." "Lucy will only tremble," Mrs. Lacey said. "Clegg will scold her for it, and that will make her worse." "Clegg's scolding," Miss Marple said mildly, "is a form of comfort he gives to himself. It does not travel well." She held up the coffee cup to the lamplight. "Tell me, Inspector, was there ash in the grate of that little room?" "A pinch," Cray said. "Lavender scent." "How industrious," Miss Marple said. "One forgets how diligent grief can be when it is staged." Mr. Derry turned, the light catching the pallor under his eyes. "You think this is a performance?" "I think," Miss Marple answered, "someone has set a scene to educate an audience of one. Perhaps two." She looked at him, not unkindly. "You knew Clara Vane?" He did not answer at once. When he spoke, it came with the effort of a splinter moving beneath skin. "She was older than I. I was 20 and certain, and she had the kind of composure that makes boys imagine honor. She sang once at the Assembly Rooms in Bath. Christmas songs, of course, and everyone pretended not to see how frightened she was. Then they spent the spring deciding what her fear meant for them." He gave a flat smile. "That is a village talent, Miss Marple. Interpreting other people's fear." "Bath," Inspector Cray said sharply. "We found a hotel matchbook from Bath on the desk. When were you last there?" "2 months ago," Derry said, and then added with almost boyish defiance, "I went to the hotel bar because I knew she had once stood in that doorway. I wanted to see how small it really was. It was smaller." There was a shifting among the guests. Neither censure nor sympathy, merely appetite for complication. Daphne Allerton lifted her chin, eyes bright and brittle. "Clara Vane would never have countenanced this theatrics," she said. "She suffered in private." "That," Miss Marple said gently, "is precisely why a public lesson suits the person who arranged it." Colonel Lacey tugged at his mustache. "But who, dash it?" Miss Marple considered the freshly painted edge along the green door, the bays the inspector had found in the cupboard, the dumbwaiter shaft that would groan if hurried and whisper if coaxed. She thought of the small silver button with an anchor, scuffed but crisp, and of a rowing boy who had given up rowing because something had soured the water. She thought of Lucy's trembling loyalty and Clegg's officious notes, of Mr. Wills's lime plaster, of Daphne's unspent anger, of George Allerton's stiff politeness, which was the politeness of a man who knows exactly where the money came from and exactly whom it hurt. "Rooms do not appear," she said, without permitting the corridor to go a little wrong. "I notice the linen cupboard shelves are shyer than last year. Someone has been stealing inches for some time. That speaks to patience, and patience suggests a person at home in the house." Mrs. Lacey pressed a hand to her throat. "You do not mean—" "No," Miss Marple said at once. "You have lent the house your kindness, which is a far different thing. But kindness can be used as cover, just as dusting covers fingerprints. Forgive me, that is only experience speaking." Inspector Cray addressed Mr. Derry again. "If you knew Clara Vane, you also know who profited when her people failed." "I suppose we all know," Derry said with a bleak glance at George Allerton. "Some of us pretended it was respectable." George flushed a slow, angry red. "This is intolerable. My uncle made an investment." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, "but investments are rather like photographs. They show what one wishes to remember and hide what one cannot bear to see. The truth is still there, only outside the frame." She turned to Daphne. "My dear, you spoke of moral ownership. That is a courageous thing to say. It sometimes provokes an unwise one." Daphne's hands were very still upon her lap. "If I had arranged a ghost," she said, "it would not have been so delicate." "Delicacy," Miss Marple replied, "is frequently used by people who hope to be forgiven." Cray sighed. "We will draw lots for a handful of hours' sleep if such can be found. Constable Hollis will remain by the stair. Miss Marple, you should rest." "Rest is a habit," she said. "I have others." The house settled reluctantly, as if each door had to be persuaded in turn. Miss Marple took a seat by the drawing-room chimney and closed her eyes, though she did not sleep. In the doze that is listening by other means, she heard the soft creak of old joists, the far-off, careful breath of the dumb-waiter rope. A kettle protested into usefulness. Lucy's quick steps damped by carpet. Clegg's deliberate ones amplified by intention. Twice she counted 21 and thought of the clock in the little room, forever halted at the moment when someone wished time would stop. She rose at last and went to the hall, where the cold made honesty of the air. Mr. Derry stood at a window, drawing a shape on the frost with his finger and rubbing it out again. "What happens in the morning?" he asked, without turning. "Morning," Miss Marple said, "is the time when people choose whether they meant what they did in the dark." She touched the frost, herself drawing a small anchor and erasing it. "If someone meant to frighten you back to a promise, they have overreached. Fear will keep a man longer than love, but it makes for poor company." He laughed, and the sound had the surprise of something breaking. "What promise?" "The kind a boy makes to a legend," she said, "and let that be." A movement at the stair drew her eye. Lucy stood there with a shawl about her shoulders, clutching a parcel wrapped in brown paper and tied with a crooked string. She saw Miss Marple and started, then came down, biting her lip. "I found this," she whispered. "In the dumbwaiter, ma'am. Just now. I did not like to trouble the inspector at once." Miss Marple took the parcel. It had the ghostly, consoling weight of clothes. The paper smelt of lavender and old drawers. She loosened the knot and folded back the brown, and there lay a dress the color of winter sky, and on its collar a brooch that was not a brooch at all, but a small silver button engraved with an anchor, hastily drilled to take a pin. "Dear me," Miss Marple said, neither shocked nor pleased. "Someone has been making the past wearable." Lucy's eyes brimmed. "I did not do wrong, bringing it to you." "You have done exactly right," Miss Marple said, tucking the parcel close. "We will show it to Inspector Cray in the morning. For now, put the kettle on again, my dear. Houses like to be comforted when they have confessed." And as Lucy fled gratefully to the kitchen, Miss Marple stood very still, listening to the faint, unwilling quiet that follows the first truth told, and thinking of a room that did not exist until someone needed it badly enough to build it out of inches, patience, and a story that refused to stay buried. Dawn crept into Gossington Lodge with the resigned pallor of winter. Miss Marple had not slept, yet her mind felt brisk from a night of listening. She set the brown paper parcel on the table and untied the string. The winter sky dress looked less spectral by daylight. She touched the improvised brooch, an anchor button drilled to take a pin, and thought of boys who keep their clubs by stealth when manhood asks them to put such things away. Inspector Cray arrived with frost in his hair. "Good morning, Miss Marple. Mr. Wills insists there was no door at the end of the corridor until last night. He will swear as much before the magistrate, and I fancy at luncheon." "He may speak the truth as he knows it," she said. "Carpenters remember lines. The person we seek remembers margins." "Lucy says you have something." "The dumbwaiter brought it up between 12 and 1, she replied. "Time conspires with intention." She showed the hastily unpicked collar seam and the anchor-turned brooch. Cray's jaw made that satisfied movement a man makes when a piece fits, though not yet the picture. "A school blazer button," he said. "Riverside College rose under anchors." "Boys delight in tribes," Miss Marple said. "Men are sometimes loth to relinquish them." "Where is Mr. Derry?" "In the conservatory," Cray answered. "He looks as if he has visited a grave. I will start with George and Daphne Allerton." The Allertons entered with indignation. George stood braced for weather. Daphne sat and looked steadier. Miss Marple took up her knitting and settled to harmlessness. Cray placed the dress on the table. "Do either of you recognize this?" Daphne's flush rose and halted at her cheekbones. "It is Clara's color," she said. "She wore winter sky blue the night she sang in Bath, but this is not her dress. Hers had fine lace." "A lace collar can be unpicked," Miss Marple observed. George's eyes fixed on the anchor. "That is not a brooch." "Ingenuity is a confession of shortage," Miss Marple said. "When one cannot fetch the right thing, one makes something else do." Cray asked, "Mr. Allerton, did your late uncle, or your accounts, deal with Mr. Roland Derry?" "Derry owned 5% in a syndicate my uncle chaired," George admitted. He sold at a loss. And Clara Vane? Daphne answered before he could. She had a claim. Not in writing, of course. He promised something, then told himself it had never been promised. Promises, Miss Marple said, often take the form of attention. When taken away, they leave a jagged hole. Cray made notes. Where were you between 12 and 1? In bed, George said stiffly. In tears, Daphne said evenly. I went down to the library at 12:30. The fire was embers. I heard a rattle in the walls. The dumbwaiter, I suppose. Did you meet anyone? Only my temper, she said. I put it back on the shelf and returned to bed. Cray was thorough. Thorough men trust lists. Miss Marple trusted sequences. She walked the east corridor again with Daphne's answer folded like a letter. The green door looked cooler by day, more deliberate. The stopped mantel clock remained theatrical. Beneath the skirting, she found a fine residue of sawdust that assertions dislike. Dust has a loyalty to truth carpenters cannot command. Mr. Wills came with a plan and an injured air. I boxed the pipe run and patched the damp. If there's a room, somebody put it there with a fairy wand. Fairies are often older ladies with sensible shoes, Miss Marple said, smiling. But fairy wands do exist. A false wall on quiet trolleys can rattle like a dumbwaiter. Where does the shaft run? Behind the kitchen stair, Wills said. Up from the pantry to the east landing. Thank you. And your men, any with an anchor on a cuff? They'd have skulls and crossbones if you let them, he snorted. But I saw a lad last week doing a delivery for the Riverside College. Anchor on his blazer. Brought a crate marked Stage Properties to the hall for the pageant. Stage Properties, Miss Marple repeated softly. Clegg, with coal scuttle and dogma, confirmed that crates had been stored and removed yesterday afternoon. I signed for them, he said, producing a receipt. Young Mr. Fenwick borrowed 2 lanterns after supper. Lanterns, Miss Marple said, and perhaps a folding screen. Cray had Mr. Fenwick fetched. Pink with glue, the young man confessed to lanterns, denied rooms, and blurted that Lucy was much put upon, which endeared him to Miss Marple. He knew nothing of the Bath photographer and looked at the dress as at a hymn he had never learned. Miss Marple went to the kitchen. Lucy polished spoons as if speed could make silver forget. Dear, Miss Marple asked, when you brought up the parcel, did the dumbwaiter stop of its own accord, or did someone above restrain it? Lucy frowned. It shuddered once, like it had more weight than it liked, then came smooth. I put my hand to the rope and it felt warm. Warm, Miss Marple repeated, as if someone had just let go. Lucy's eyes widened. Oh, ma'am. Never mind, Miss Marple soothed. Rumour grew as the day lengthened. Some swore they saw a woman at the east window. Others insisted the photograph smiled. Miss Marple paid them no mind. By late afternoon, Cray had collected alibis that would not fall apart and did not fit together. He decided to lock the green room and set a seal. Before you do, Miss Marple said, allow me 1 minute more. She went in and listened. Here the house had a second heart, the tick of pipes and a softer sound, like breath behind paper. Pressing along the wallpaper seam behind the chair, she felt it bow in return. Thank you, she whispered. When the seal was set, the house emptied toward the village pageant. Miss Marple put on stout boots and asked Lucy to walk to the riverside. Snow marked each footfall. College boys shouted. A banner with anchors flapped. My dears, she asked, has anyone mislaid a blazer button? They had. A youth produced a tin of survivors. None matched. All gleamed too new. She thanked them and bought a paper from a boy singing headlines. On the 3rd page, a small notice announced the death, in Bath, of Mrs. Clara Vane, aged 42, after a short illness. The date was 3 weeks past. Miss Marple folded the paper and felt that click when what has already happened aligns with what must now happen. She and Lucy walked home as lamps kindled and pageant bells began. At the lodge, Inspector Cray waited with a look admitting irritation. "You have been doing my job again." "No," Miss Marple said. "You must catch a culprit. I must catch a story." "And have you caught it?" "I've caught its tail," she said. "Tomorrow we shall see if it belongs to a lion or to a cat with soot on its whiskers." A constable burst in, snow on his shoulders. "Sir, the sealed door. Someone's broken it. The room—" "Yes," Cray snapped. "Gone," the constable said hoarsely. "There's only wall." Snow powdered the steps as Inspector Cray stared at the unbroken plaster where a green door had been. The seal he had set, his initials in red wax, lay snapped on the floor. Beyond, there was not even a hairline seam, only paint drawn neat to the skirting and a baseboard freshly polished. Cray rapped the wall. It answered with the dull thud of lath. "It was here," he said. "By heaven, it was here." "It is still here," Miss Marple answered, mild as steam. "Only it is pretending to be somewhere else." Mrs. Lacey steadied herself on the banister. "Shall I have more lamps brought?" "Please," Miss Marple said. "And if Mr. Wills will permit, a kettle of hot water." The carpenter arrived. "Hot water? For a wall?" "For paint," Miss Marple said. "Cold paint lies. Warm paint loosens its tongue." When the lamps were set and the kettle steamed, she held a damp cloth to the baseboard. A faint green fog bled from the polish. "Furniture wax with tint," she said. "Hides scuffs when things are moved and must not seem to have moved." Cray crouched. "Casters." "Silenced with felt," Miss Marple said. "Lanterns for a pageant, trolleys that rattle like dumbwaiters, walls that arrive and depart like actresses. Your seal was across door and frame, Inspector. The trick is easier when one removes the frame." Lucy put a hand to her mouth. "Like the stage." "Precisely," Miss Marple said. "Mr. Fenwick is not to blame. Tricks are borrowed by people who cannot bear to speak plain." Cray signalled. The constable fetched a chisel. With careful pressure, he lifted a run of base moulding. Behind lay a slim metal track fixed with brads. They found the notch, no bigger than a coin, behind the linen cupboard, disguised by paint dragged with a dry brush. The touch of a knife released a catch. The walls sighed and swung away on silent wheels to reveal not the green room, but a shallow void smelling of paste and lavender. On the far side hung the papered face of the vanished door. Miss Marple examined the inside edge and nodded at beeswax smears, a hair caught like a thought, and a crescent of dried red where the wax seal had transferred. "My compliments," she said softly. "Not to the deceit, which is shabby, but to the moderation. Whoever did this liked doors to open without noise." "Why the trouble?" Colonel Lacey demanded. "Why not hang a curtain and be done?" "Because curtains expose the operator," Miss Marple said. "One wishes to be elsewhere when surprise is sprung." She looked to the floor. "And because a rolling wall can be nudged from below." Cray followed her glance. The dumbwaiter shaft, a black mouth, breathed cold. He sniffed. "Lavender and starch." "Brown paper and a dress travelled here," Miss Marple said. "Not far and not alone." They traced the shaft to the pantry. There, they found scuffs on the sill and a shred of green felt snagged on a nail. Clegg's boiler ledger, produced with pride, listed pressures in a precise hand. Between 12 and 1 the needle dipped and rose. "Lucy," Miss Marple asked, "please think. When you dusted at 11, did anything hinder you?" "The cupboard stuck," Lucy said. "Only a little. I thought it damp." "Grief swells wood, too," Miss Marple said. The pageant music wandered across the snow. Mr. Derry came from the conservatory. "Inspector," he said, handing over a parcel. "This was tucked behind a fern. I did not put it there." Inside lay the bath matchbook and a second handkerchief, clean, its edge stitched with an initial C. Cray peered. "A plant to match a plant," You were meant to find the first. You were meant to bring us the second. I am tired, Derry said, of being meant. Miss Marple watched his jaw. When a woman dies, she said, people arrange the furniture of memory. They move chairs, pull a wall across the harshest view. In parlors it is tact, in corridors, mischief. Cray drew a line. Who benefits? Benefit is the wrong word, Miss Marple said. Who requires a ritual? Daphne requires justice that looks like honor. George requires quiet that looks like discretion. Clegg requires duty that looks like authority. Lucy requires kindness that looks like permission. Mr. Derry requires punishment that looks like relief. And you, Miss Marple? Colonel Lacey asked. I require tea, she said. After that, truth. They drank it standing. Then Cray sent for Daphne and George. In the morning room, he laid out the dress, the improvised brooch, the matchbook, the handkerchiefs, and the receipt for pageant properties. Daphne looked at the array as one looks at an accusation that finally knows its grammar. I made the room, she said, before anyone asked. I designed it. I did not cut wood or fix casters. Mr. Wills did not know. I paid a boy from the college to help me wheel it. I meant to force a conversation ducked for years. George started. Daphne! Be quiet, she said. I wanted Roland to speak Clara's name where others could hear. I wanted him to remember when it mattered. I wanted to make a moral photograph and put him inside it. Cray's pen did not move. Did you place the blood? She winced. I pricked my thumb. It seemed effective. And the second handkerchief? I did not place that, Daphne said. I'm not sentimental. You did not, however, send a parcel by dumbwaiter at 20 to 1, Miss Marple said. No, Daphne said, troubled. I'd gone to bed and quarreled with the ceiling. Someone assisted your morality with theatre, Miss Marple said. Assistance is often a bribe. George found his voice. This is monstrous, he said, but his anger stopped at the threshold. Cray dismissed them and stood looking at the wall. So we have a confession that explains the what and not the why. It explains one why, Miss Marple said. Revenge dressed as remembrance. But we lack the second why, the silent motive that walks beside the declared one. She went to the kitchen again, where Lucy was cutting bread too thick. My dear, Miss Marple said, if one wished to frighten a man back into paying a debt of honor, one would not drown him. If one wished to remove a witness to a trick, one might. Lucy's knife stopped. Is Mr. Derry in danger? Only, Miss Marple said, from people who confuse payment with penance. They are near relations. Snow ticked against the window. From the pantry came a soft thump, the dumb waiter coming to rest. Miss Marple pulled the rope. A parcel rose, smaller than before, wrapped in newspaper and tied with twine as Clegg's ledger. Inside lay 3 items: the missing lace collar, a small bottle labeled lavender water, Mrs. Vane's hand, and a theatre program from Bath, blotched by a tear that had fallen before it dried. Oh, Miss Marple said. Oh, that is foolish. Clegg stood in the doorway. Ma'am, bring Inspector Cray, she said. And Mr. Clegg, bring also the keys you keep for rooms no one visits. He did not ask which. He fetched them all. His hands trembled despite practiced dignity. The morning mist hung low over St. Mary Mead as Miss Marple walked along the lane toward the lodge. Crisp air carried the faint tang of smoke from the village chimneys, and the soft crunch of snow underfoot echoed the thoughts forming in her mind. Every step allowed her to rehearse the threads of last night's revelations: the green door that wasn't a door, the parcel in the dumbwaiter, the dress, the improvised anchor brooch, and Daphne's admission. Yet the solution was not yet fully visible. The final puzzle piece had not quite settled. When she reached the lodge, the house seemed quieter than usual. Even the snow muffled the usual clatter of boots and voices. Through the east corridor, she could hear the low murmur of Inspector Cray interrogating Mr. Wills again, and Clegg moving about with purpose, keys clinking like punctuation. She entered the drawing room and found the inspector examining the various artifacts. The lace collar, the small bottle of lavender water, and the Bath Theatre program, each laid out meticulously on the low table. Miss Marple joined him. "Have you considered, Inspector," she said, "that the room and its contents were not merely to frighten or shame, but to compel recognition? A moral photograph, as Daphne said, but one in which the observer is trapped within the frame." Cray raised an eyebrow. "You mean someone intended Mr. Derry to confront Clara Vane's memory in a theatrical fashion?" "Exactly," Miss Marple replied. "But that is only half the story. The other half lies in the second parcel, delivered after midnight. Whoever sent that wished to complete the narrative, to provide a closure that the first parcel could not. That is where the motive deepens." At that moment, Mr. Derry entered, carrying the small tin of buttons he had found earlier, his expression taut with unease. "Inspector, Miss Marple," he said, "there is something you should see. I found a letter tucked inside the lining of one of the lantern crates. It is addressed to me, but unsigned." Cray took the letter, unfolding it carefully. The handwriting was elegant and deliberate. "Remember what is owed, and who watches." No signature, no further clue. Miss Marple examined it quietly, noting the pressure of the ink, the curve of the letters, and the unusual choice of words. She smiled faintly. "This letter is a bridge between the two parcels. It is a reminder of debt, but also a sign of surveillance. Someone is orchestrating the scene meticulously." "Could it be Daphne again?" Cray asked. "She admitted to the first parcel." Miss Marple shook her head. "No, Inspector. Daphne acted out of impulse, emotion, and a desire for moral correction. The second parcel, coming after midnight, requires premeditation. That belongs to another hand, one skilled in observation, one who knows the house intimately, and one who understands Mr. Derry's psychology." The three of them moved toward the east corridor. Miss Marple's eyes traced every seam, every smudge, every shadow. She paused at the cupboard door that concealed the secret mechanism. "Do you see this, Inspector?" she said. "Note the alignment of the skirting here. It is too perfect for improvisation. Someone adjusted it after the first display. They wanted the wall to vanish and reappear without suspicion." Cray ran his fingers along the baseboard. "So the room was meant to be temporary, a stage to project a message." "Precisely," Miss Marple said. "But what is fascinating is the psychology behind it. The person responsible is neither cruel nor careless. They understand human behavior and exploit it subtly. They want Mr. Derry to confront his own conscience, to see himself reflected in the choices he made regarding Clara Vane." Lucy entered the corridor, carrying another parcel wrapped in brown paper. She looked nervous. "Ma'am, I found this behind the pantry door. It was warm, as if someone had just handled it." Miss Marple took the parcel and untied the string. Inside lay a notebook, leather-bound, the edges worn, pages filled with meticulous notes on Gossington Lodge, who entered which room, the timing of each servant's duties, observations on Mr. Derry's habits, and references to the parcels already discovered. At the back, in a different hand, were diagrams of the secret room and instructions on operating the rolling mechanism. Cray examined the notebook in astonishment. "This is a detailed record. Who would do this?" Miss Marple traced her finger over the diagrams. "Someone who combines curiosity with patience. Someone who knows how to orchestrate events and watch without being seen. I've seen this type of observation before in people who live quietly among others, but notice everything, the tiniest gestures, the faintest inconsistencies." "Then you suspect?" Cray asked, leaning closer. Miss Marple did not answer immediately. Instead, she walked to the drawing-room window, watching the snow glint in the morning light. "We must consider motive, Inspector. The person orchestrating this display did so not for vengeance in the usual sense, but to prompt acknowledgement, perhaps even repentance, from Mr. Derry. They are leveraging the past, the collective memory of those present, and the psychological weight of guilt. Cray nodded slowly, processing the implications. So the secret room, the parcels, the letters, the button, all of it was a carefully staged intervention. Exactly, Miss Marple said. But it is also a test. Whoever did this wanted to see how Derry would react when confronted. They wanted to observe him, unnoticed, and to guide the outcome indirectly. Who, Cray asked, has the combination of patience, insight, and access to the house to accomplish all this? Miss Marple smiled faintly. Ah, Inspector, that is the question. It is often someone underestimated, someone present but considered harmless, someone who blends into the scenery. It is rarely those whose motives are obvious. Human behavior is far more subtle than even the most meticulous stage directions. The day advanced, and the household assembled for tea, each guest unaware of the intricate psychological drama that had played out around them. Miss Marple remained quiet, observing faces, noting the small tells, the flicker of an eye, a tightening jaw, the way hands gripped a teacup. Each gesture was a piece of evidence, every reaction a clue. Mr. Derry, meanwhile, seemed restless. He walked the length of the drawing room, pausing to glance at portraits and fireplaces, at doors and windows, as if expecting the house itself to reveal the culprit. Miss Marple approached him quietly. "Do not let impatience govern you," she said. "The person you seek does not announce themselves. They reveal themselves in patterns, in consistency, in the quiet repetition of small acts." He looked at her, a mixture of relief and apprehension in his expression. "I'm afraid I cannot read these patterns," he admitted. "Then you must watch carefully," she said. "And you must consider what is absent as well as what is present. The empty spaces often tell the most." As afternoon waned into evening, Miss Marple convened a small, informal gathering in the library. She presented the items again: the dress, the handkerchiefs, the notebook, the letter, the diagrams. Everyone studied them in silence. Even the Allertons, who had been defensive and sharp earlier, seemed subdued, recognizing the gravity of the situation. "Now," Miss Marple said softly, "I will ask each of you to consider your role, your access, and your observations. Someone has orchestrated this display. Someone has guided the sequence of events to illuminate a truth. And that truth is not merely about the past. It is about conscience, about recognition, about accountability." She let the words hang in the warm lamplight, and one by one, eyes shifted, thoughts turned inward. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of the library clock, the same rhythm that had been halted and restarted in the secret chamber, echoing the deliberate pacing of the person who had set all these events in motion. Miss Marple finally leaned back, knitting needles poised. "By midnight, we may discover not merely who arranged the secret room, but why they chose these methods, and perhaps why they trusted us to observe, to interpret, and ultimately, to understand." The weight of the morning, the afternoon, and the orchestrated events settled over the household like freshly fallen snow. Outside, St. Mary Mead was peaceful, oblivious to the intricate web of observation, deception, and subtle moral reckoning unfolding within Gossington Lodge. Yet within the walls, every glance, every gesture, every small object carried significance. And Miss Marple, as always, watched it all, her quiet mind piecing together the story that the house itself had begun to tell. Evening settled over Gossington Lodge with a quiet intensity, the air carrying a frost-tinged hush that seemed to make the house itself hold its breath. Miss Marple remained in the library, her knitting needles still, her gaze tracing the sequence of events that had unfolded from the mysterious green door, the staged room, and the parcels. Each item, each gesture, had been a clue, A deliberate act, a signal, and she now felt that the invisible threads were converging toward a conclusion. Inspector Cray entered, his expression weary but alert. "Miss Marple," he said, "I have completed a second round of interviews with the servants. Everyone confirms that no one, besides Daphne and the household staff, could have had the access and the knowledge to orchestrate the room's appearance. But that does not account for the timing of the second parcel, nor the precise placement of the notes and diagrams." Miss Marple nodded. "Indeed, Inspector. And that is where our attention must turn, not to the hands that executed the plan, but to the mind that directed it. The orchestration required knowledge, timing, and subtlety beyond mere impulse. Daphne acted with conscience and emotion, but someone guided the secondary measures with calculation. They moved to the east corridor together. The wall, now restored, appeared solid, a deceptive calm over the mystery it concealed. Miss Marple ran her gloved fingers along the baseboard, noting the faint traces of wax and paint. "See here," she murmured. "The markings betray an alignment repeated more than once. Someone has rehearsed this, not for spectacle alone, but for observation, an experiment in human reaction." Cray frowned. "You mean they wanted to see how Derry would respond to the first parcel?" "Precisely," Miss Marple replied, "and the second parcel confirms it. The mind behind it anticipated responses, gauged surprise, managed timing, and orchestrated concealment. They wished to educate, to admonish, to confront conscience, quietly, yet undeniably." At that moment, Mr. Derry appeared at the doorway, carrying the Bath Theatre program. His hands trembled slightly. "I have reviewed the program," he said. "It corresponds to the performance I attended. Every song, every movement is mirrored in the timing of the parcels, the notes, the green door. It is deliberate. Someone has arranged all of this as a performance, with me as the audience." Miss Marple regarded him calmly. "And as the subject. But consider this. Why direct such attention to you? Why so meticulous, so careful?" He looked down. "Perhaps because I was responsible for her misery. I promised, I failed. I ignored the claims, the needs. I did not act, and now someone has demanded that I confront the consequences." "Indeed," Miss Marple said softly. "And the question is not only who orchestrated it, but how they managed to maintain secrecy while commanding such precision." Cray consulted his notebook. "We have timelines, footprints, and witness accounts. Lucy's observation of the dumbwaiter, the scuff marks, the faint green residue, all consistent. But who controlled it from outside Daphne's immediate intervention?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Consider access, Inspector. The person must live quietly among the household, be unremarkable in presence, yet capable of observation. They need knowledge of routines, furniture placement, and the psychology of the guests. They do not act in haste. They allow the drama to unfold, nudging events rather than forcing them." Lucy, standing nearby, shifted nervously. "Ma'am, could it be one of the servants? Clegg, or perhaps the maid in the East Wing?" Miss Marple shook her head. "No, my dear. Servants execute. They do not orchestrate. Their hands are guided by conscience or duty, rarely by foresight. This requires both patience and insight. The signature lies not in execution, but in design." At that moment, a muffled thud came from the pantry. Miss Marple moved silently to investigate, Cray following. The dumbwaiter stood still, yet a faint draft hinted at its recent use. She touched the pulley lightly. "Someone has utilized this mechanism with finesse. Only someone familiar with the house could have accomplished it without detection. The placement of the parcels and notes is not random. It is a carefully calculated psychological progression." Cray examined the pantry shelves. "But no one admitted to this second act," he said. "Which is exactly the point," Miss Marple replied. "The person responsible remains unnoticed, yet ever present. They operate behind a veil of inconspicuousness. Consider the clues. A handkerchief misplaced intentionally, a second parcel timed for observation, diagrams and notes left to reinforce a lesson. Only someone with intimate knowledge and an understanding of human nature could choreograph this without detection. They returned to the drawing room, where Mr. Derry had placed the dress, the anchor brooch, and the letter side by side. Miss Marple examined each. "Notice the sequence," she said. "The dress first, to provoke reflection. The brooch, a symbol to connect memory and present. The letter, a silent accusation and prompt. Each step is deliberate, designed to provoke reaction, to teach, to measure conscience." George Allerton entered, his face flushed with confusion and residual anger. "I still do not understand. Who is behind this? Is it some moral lesson or a theatrical jest?" Miss Marple's eyes flicked to him gently. "It is both, George. A lesson cloaked in drama, a message delivered with precision. The person behind it wishes to highlight responsibility and provoke reflection rather than simply punish. Observe reactions, note hesitation, interpret gestures. This is the signature of intelligence, subtlety, and patience." Daphne, meanwhile, had remained silent. Her admission of the first parcel was sufficient for conscience, yet she watched closely as the dynamics unfolded. Miss Marple considered her. Daphne acted with emotion, George with propriety, Lucy with fear, but the final act requires a mind that remains unobserved, whose work is inferred rather than seen. The pattern is clear, but the hand that guided it is hidden. Cray consulted his notes again. "So we have the orchestrator, the executor, and the target. Derry is the audience, Daphne is the instrument, and someone else is the composer." "Exactly," Miss Marple said, knitting absent-mindedly. "And the composer is often the most ordinary-seeming person in the household, the one no one suspects because their presence is inconspicuous, their motives hidden behind everyday concern. They measure, they calculate, and they act with patience." Lucy shivered. "But ma'am, who could that be? Who watches so quietly?" Miss Marple looked around the room, eyes scanning faces, gestures, and postures. Someone who listens more than they speak, observes more than they move, and blends into the ordinary flow of life. They are trusted, underestimated, yet they understand human behavior as we understand our knitting. Every thread matters, every pattern counts. Cray nodded slowly. "So the final reveal depends not on catching someone in the act, but interpreting the act itself, the orchestration, the sequence, the subtle nudges that led to each reaction." "Exactly," Miss Marple said, "and that is why observation is the key. Watch carefully, note the patterns, consider the psychology, and the hidden hand will reveal itself, not by clumsiness, but by consistency." The snow fell steadily outside, muffling sound and lending the house an air of suspended reality. Inside, Miss Marple considered the timeline. First parcel, midnight delivery, manipulation of the dumbwaiter, precise placement of items, observations of reactions. The room itself, the green door, the staged chamber, the rolling wall, was a tool of pedagogy, designed to teach, to admonish, and to measure conscience. Mr. Derry stood silently, absorbing the implications. "I understand now," he said quietly. "This orchestrated morality. Someone wanted me to feel my failings, to see Clara Vane not as a shadow, but as a presence demanding recognition." Miss Marple nodded. "Yes, and that is why the final act, the second parcel, the notes, the handkerchiefs, is crucial. The orchestrator tests the conscience, gauges the response, and ensures the lesson is observed without revealing their identity. The stage is set, the actors are in place, and the audience, though unwilling, is compelled to engage." Cray sighed, closing his notebook. "So we wait, Miss Marple, for the final reveal." "In a manner of speaking, Inspector," she said. But remember, the reveal is never about spectacle alone. It is about timing, observation, and subtle recognition. When the orchestrator chooses to step forward or inadvertently reveals themselves, the truth will emerge as naturally as dawn follows night. The household settled into uneasy quiet, the snow falling, the walls holding their secrets, and Miss Marple, as always, watching, knitting, and piecing together the final puzzle of human behavior, waiting for the moment when the orchestrator would reveal their hand through patterns too consistent to deny. Morning light struggled through the frost-flecked windows of Gossington Lodge, casting pale bars across the drawing-room where Miss Marple sat with a quiet composure, knitting needles poised but idle in her lap. She had spent the night in contemplative observation, tracing events in her mind as one might follow a delicate embroidery pattern. The green door that appeared and vanished, the staged room, the parcels, the handkerchiefs, the diary of notes, and the meticulous orchestration of reactions. Each element revealed not only the intentions of the actors, but subtly the hand of the orchestrator, patient, deliberate, and unassuming. Inspector Cray entered briskly, carrying a small bundle of papers and letters. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice betraying impatience laced with curiosity, "I have collated all accounts and timelines. The servants are consistent in their recollections. They observed nothing beyond the normal activity of the household. Yet the events of last night and the deliveries through the dumbwaiter, these were executed with precision, as if by someone who knew both the house and the people intimately." "Precisely, Inspector," Miss Marple replied, her eyes lifting to meet his. "And yet the mystery lies not in the execution, but in the design. Consider carefully. Who could orchestrate such a series of events, remaining unseen while measuring responses and adjusting their performance in real time?" Cray laid out the letters, diagrams, and the Bath Theatre program on the table. Each item, when viewed collectively, suggested an almost theatrical sensibility, a choreography intended to elicit specific emotions and reactions. Miss Marple studied them intently, noting the sequence, the timing, and the subtle symbolism embedded within. "Mr. Derry," she began softly, "did you notice any changes in the placement of objects in the house before last night? Anything out of the ordinary that you might have dismissed?" Derry, who had been pacing near the fireplace, paused and shook his head. "Nothing that caught my attention, Miss Marple. I would have noticed anything unusual. I have lived here long enough to detect the smallest change. But last night everything seemed intentional. Every detail, every pause, every movement. It was calculated." "Indeed," she murmured. "Calculation implies a mind both patient and familiar with its subjects. Someone who watches without interfering, yet knows when and how to guide events. The execution may be emotional, impulsive, or even dramatic. But the hand that orchestrates, that remains unseen, is methodical." The door opened quietly, and Lucy entered, carrying a small bundle of letters she had discovered in the East Wing. She handed them to Miss Marple with visible trepidation. "Ma'am, I found these behind the larder door. They were carefully hidden. I wasn't sure whether to bring them." Miss Marple took the letters and opened them delicately. The handwriting was familiar, neat, precise, measured, and each missive contained observations on household activities, minor inconsistencies in routines, and detailed accounts of Mr. Derry's habits. Some notes referenced past events involving Clara Vane, and several were intended as prompts, guiding Derry toward recognition of moral responsibility. One letter, in particular, stood out, its contents carefully folded and annotated. "Observe his response to yesterday's parcel. Measure hesitation, note reflection, adjust guidance accordingly." Cray leaned over her shoulder. The handwriting, it is deliberate, almost as if someone were recording their own experiment. "Exactly," Miss Marple said. The orchestrator is observing human behavior, not merely documenting it. Each action is intended to provoke thought, to measure conscience, to create an inevitable reflection on past choices. This is more than mischief or theatrics. It is an education, delivered subtly, yet with precision. Daphne Allerton entered the room quietly, her eyes downcast. She had confessed to creating the initial green room, but her demeanor now suggested concern over additional unseen influences. I only intended to make Mr. Derry acknowledge his past failings, she said softly. I never thought someone else would expand on my work, adding these letters, these observations, these tests. Miss Marple regarded her with a gentle smile. You acted on conscience and emotion. That is the first layer, but someone has taken your impulse and refined it with patience and foresight. That is the second layer, the guiding hand that remains unnoticed while the drama unfolds. George Allerton, standing by the window with crossed arms, frowned. This is all very well, Miss Marple, but who is capable of such subtlety? Who would orchestrate events so meticulously without revealing themselves? That, my dear George, Miss Marple said, is precisely what we must discover. Look for consistency in observation, for an understanding of human nature that allows a person to predict reactions. The orchestrator is familiar with the household, yet underestimated. They blend into ordinary life, unnoticed, yet their influence is everywhere. The conversation was interrupted by the faint sound of movement in the east corridor. Miss Marple, without a word, walked toward the source, Cray following closely. There, just visible behind the corner, was a slight figure moving with deliberate caution, a servant, but one who paused to note reactions, one who observed rather than acted impulsively. The subtlety of motion, the attentiveness, the awareness of timing, it matched every behavioral pattern that Miss Marple had deduced. Lucy, she said softly, and the girl froze. Miss Marple stepped closer. You have been attentive, conscientious, and careful. You have observed patterns and recorded them, haven't you? Lucy's eyes widened. I only wanted to help, ma'am. I did not mean to. You have provided insight, Miss Marple said kindly. But insight alone does not orchestrate action. Consider the handwriting in these letters, the placement of the parcels, the timing of the dumbwaiter. You did not create these measures, you observed. But who directed the observation? The room fell silent, as if awaiting an answer. Cray tapped his pen against the table. Miss Marple, are you suggesting that someone else is manipulating events beyond what Daphne has confessed? Precisely, Inspector, she replied. And this person has done so with patience and care, guiding reactions and influencing outcomes while remaining invisible. Consider the psychology involved. A staged room to provoke conscience, a first parcel to elicit reflection, a second parcel to complete the moral lesson. Each action is measured, deliberate, and designed to reveal character. Derry, standing nearby, ran a hand through his hair. Then someone has been orchestrating all of this, watching, waiting, and ensuring I face my past. But who? Who is capable of such subtlety? Miss Marple rose and walked toward the window, gazing out at the snow-laden grounds. The orchestrator is someone underestimated, someone whose ordinary presence conceals extraordinary insight. They understand human behavior, they anticipate responses, and they act without need for recognition. The hand that guides is hidden in plain sight. Cray rubbed his temples. We have the executor, Daphne. We have the audience, Derry. But the composer, who is it? Miss Marple smiled faintly. Ah, Inspector, the composer reveals themselves not through a grand gesture, but through consistency, subtlety, and foresight. Observe the patterns, note the attention to detail, and the orchestrator will emerge, not by accident, but by the very method they have employed. Outside, the snow began to soften under the morning sun, reflecting light into the corridors. Inside, Gossington Lodge seemed to hold its breath, aware that the next stage of revelation was imminent. Miss Marple, as always, remained composed, watching, knitting, and piecing together the puzzle of human behavior, waiting for the orchestrator to reveal their hand through the evidence of consistency, subtle influence, and carefully measured action. The household, meanwhile, went about its morning with a quiet tension. The servants moved with diligence, the Allertons spoke in measured tones, and Mr. Derry paced, unsettled yet compelled to observe. Each person, knowingly or not, contributed to the unfolding drama that Miss Marple had discerned. The sequence of events, carefully designed by the hidden orchestrator, was nearing its conclusion, and only the final act remained, the subtle psychological test that would reveal the mind behind the mystery once and for all. The afternoon sun had mellowed to a pale gold as Miss Marple walked slowly through the corridors of Gossington Lodge, her mind tracing each movement, each subtle act that had occurred since the appearance of the green door. The house seemed to breathe with quiet expectation, every door, every shadow, a witness to the careful orchestration she had so far pieced together. The secret room, the parcels, the letters, the anchor brooch. Each element had played its part in a subtle psychological drama, and now the final pieces were beginning to reveal themselves. Inspector Cray stood near the drawing-room fireplace, reviewing notes for what seemed the 100th time. He looked up as she approached. "Miss Marple, the servants are nervous, as expected. Derry is restless, and the Allertons are tense. Everyone senses something is pending, though none can put it into words." "Yes, Inspector," Miss Marple replied softly. "And that tension, that anticipation, is part of the orchestrator's design. They wish the audience to act naturally, to reveal character under subtle pressure. The environment itself becomes a mirror for conscience. Yet we still do not know who orchestrated the events beyond Daphne's initial intervention," Cray said, his voice tinged with frustration. Miss Marple nodded. "Indeed, we have the executor Daphne, we have the audience Derry, but the composer, the guiding mind, remains invisible, and the evidence of that mind is written not in actions alone, but in patterns, in meticulous observation, and in the ability to remain unnoticed while manipulating outcomes." Lucy entered cautiously, holding another small parcel, her hands trembling slightly. "Ma'am, I found this under the pantry floorboards. I thought it might be important." Miss Marple took the parcel with care. Inside lay a small notebook, its pages filled with precise observations of household activities, noting every arrival and departure, every minor inconsistency, and several reflections on Mr. Derry's habits. The annotations at the back were in a different hand, smaller, more meticulous, almost clinical, and included diagrams of the secret room and instructions for its manipulation. Cray's brow furrowed. "Someone has been documenting everything with extraordinary precision, but who?" Miss Marple examined the notebook quietly, her fingers tracing the diagrams. "The orchestrator, Inspector, is someone intimately familiar with the house, who understands its routines and the people within it. They are unnoticed, yet omnipresent in observation. The handwriting, the diagrams, the timing of parcels, these are the tools of their subtle instruction." At that moment, Mr. Derry appeared at the doorway, carrying the Bath Theatre program and a letter he had discovered. His hands were steady, but his expression was taut with unease. "These confirm it," he said. "The sequence, the timing, it mirrors the performance I attended in Bath. Every song, every gesture is echoed in the parcels and the notes. Someone has orchestrated this as a performance, with me as both participant and observer." Miss Marple nodded. "And the purpose of such orchestration is not cruelty, but education. To confront conscience, to illuminate past failings, and to provoke reflection. But we must consider the mind that engineered these measures, the one capable of maintaining secrecy while controlling events." Daphne Allerton entered quietly, her eyes downcast. I confess to arranging the initial room, she said. But the letters, the timing, the second parcel, I had no part. That was not me. Miss Marple regarded her thoughtfully. You acted on impulse and conscience, dear, but someone refined your actions, added layers of observation, and extended the lesson. That is the work of another mind, calculated, patient, and unobserved. George Allerton, standing stiffly by the window, looked incredulous. But who? Who could possess such subtlety and patience? Someone underestimated, Miss Marple said. The composer is often the most ordinary-seeming person, whose presence is unnoticed precisely because they blend into the everyday. Yet their understanding of human behavior, their foresight and their patience allow them to guide events with precision. Cray leaned forward, tapping his pen. So the final reveal depends on observing patterns, not catching the person in the act? Exactly, Miss Marple replied. Watch carefully, note consistencies, consider psychology, and the orchestrator will reveal themselves, not through clumsiness, but through the deliberate repetition of subtle acts. Lucy, still pale, whispered, But ma'am, how can anyone detect someone so careful, so hidden? Miss Marple's eyes softened. By noticing what does not belong, my dear, the orchestrator leaves traces in patterns, in timing, in the reactions of others. Even the most careful manipulator cannot erase all evidence of design. It is in these consistencies that truth resides. The house seemed to settle into a tense quiet. Outside, the snow fell steadily, muffling sound and lending an air of stillness. Inside, Miss Marple considered the timeline, the green door, the staged room, the first parcel, the dumbwaiter's midnight journey, the second parcel, the letters, and the notebook. Each had been a deliberate act, a piece of the larger pattern meant to provoke reflection and reveal character. Mr. Derry moved near the library table, his expression tense. I understand now. This orchestration, it was meant to make me face my failings, to recognize Clara Vane not as a shadow, but as a presence demanding acknowledgement. Precisely, Miss Marple said, and that is why the second parcel, the letters, and the observations were necessary. The orchestrator was not merely staging drama. They were testing conscience, gauging reaction, and ensuring that the moral lesson was delivered. Cray closed his notebook with a sigh. So we are looking for someone who watches, calculates, and manipulates subtly without drawing attention. Someone ordinary, yet extraordinarily observant. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Yes, Inspector. The orchestrator is a master of subtlety. Their work is revealed not through spectacle, but through the consistency of influence and the careful shaping of events. Every act, every placement, every timing reflects their understanding of human nature. The household moved cautiously through the afternoon, aware of an impending revelation, though unsure of its nature. Miss Marple observed quietly, noting gestures, glances, and reactions. The Allertons were restrained. Derry was reflective and tense. Lucy was anxious, yet diligent, and Clegg moved with quiet authority. Each person played their part in the unfolding drama, their responses recorded by the unseen orchestrator, whose subtle hand guided the moral and psychological unfolding of the events. Miss Marple, seated by the window, traced patterns in her mind. The orchestrator's plan was meticulous. The staged room to provoke reflection, the first parcel to trigger acknowledgement, the second parcel to complete the moral lesson, and the letters to document and reinforce the observations. Each element had been carefully timed, each response measured, and each reaction accounted for. The time approaches, she murmured to herself. The final test, the ultimate observation, is imminent. The orchestrator has guided the sequence, measured the responses, and now awaits the revelation of their own hand. The house, the people, and the objects themselves are witnesses to the subtle yet undeniable manipulation of conscience. As dusk approached, Miss Marple rose, her mind calm but alert. She moved through the corridors, noting the alignment of furniture, the subtle displacements of objects, the slight hesitations in footsteps, the glances exchanged between members of the household. Each detail was a thread in the intricate tapestry of orchestration, leading inevitably to the identity of the unseen hand. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the distant sound of church bells. Within Gossington Lodge, the stage was set, the actors had played their parts, and the final act, the subtle psychological test designed to reveal the orchestrator, was poised to unfold. Miss Marple, ever observant, waited patiently, confident that the patterns, the careful measurements, and the consistent attention to human behavior would soon disclose the mind behind the mystery, as certain as dawn follows night. The evening settled into a quiet hush at Gossington Lodge, a hush that carried with it the weight of anticipation and the lingering traces of the day's revelations. Miss Marple walked slowly through the corridors, her steps deliberate, her mind tracing the intricate sequence of events that had unfolded since the green door first appeared. The snow outside pressed soft shadows against the windows, and inside, the house seemed to hold its breath, as if aware that the final stage of revelation was approaching. Inspector Cray, clipboard in hand, moved toward her, his expression a mixture of impatience and guarded curiosity. "Miss Marple," he said, "we have gathered all possible observations, cross-checked alibis, and accounted for every movement of the household. Yet the orchestrator remains unseen. How do we proceed to uncover them?" Miss Marple adjusted her shawl, her knitting momentarily forgotten. "Inspector, the key is observation, not just of actions, but of subtleties, the gestures, the hesitations, the glances that reveal thought processes. The orchestrator does not act clumsily. They operate through influence, through suggestion, through the careful manipulation of environment and expectation. We must consider where they could act unseen, yet with perfect timing." Cray nodded. "So far, Daphne created the initial room, and Lucy observed diligently, but the secondary parcels, the notes and the diary entries, these suggest another hand, more deliberate, more calculating." "Precisely," Miss Marple said. "The orchestrator is familiar with the routines of the household, yet underestimated in presence. They understand psychology, timing, and human nature. They do not require recognition. Their work is effective precisely because it goes unnoticed." They moved to the east corridor, where the green door had once appeared. The wall was restored, yet subtle signs of movement remained. Faint impressions in the paint, the alignment of skirting boards, the slight indentations in the carpet where the rolling wall had glided. Miss Marple examined these carefully. "Notice the traces here, Inspector. Someone rehearsed this sequence, ensuring the door's movements would remain undetected while guiding reactions. Every displacement, every mark is intentional. This is the signature of the orchestrator." Cray leaned closer, his eyes scanning the marks. "And yet, none of the servants report noticing anything unusual before last night." "Exactly," Miss Marple said. "Observation alone does not indicate execution. The orchestrator remains hidden in plain sight, manipulating indirectly. They rely on the natural responses of others to complete the tableau." Lucy appeared again, carrying another parcel she had found near the dumbwaiter. "Ma'am, I thought this might be important. It was hidden beneath a false panel." Miss Marple accepted the parcel and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a small bundle of letters, each addressed to Mr. Derry, detailing minor inconsistencies in the household, past interactions, and subtle prompts designed to provoke reflection. One letter, particularly meticulous, read, "Observe the audience. Note hesitation, measure reflection, adjust guidance accordingly." Cray frowned. "So someone has been monitoring reactions, taking notes and planning the sequence meticulously. But who?" Miss Marple held the letter lightly. "The orchestrator is someone patient and intelligent, capable of understanding the moral and psychological undertones of the household. They observe, record, and subtly guide events. They do not need to intervene directly. They allow reactions to unfold naturally. Mr. Derry entered, carrying the Bath Theatre program and another letter he had discovered. His face was tense, his hands steady but deliberate. Miss Marple, Inspector, the program mirrors the sequence of events. Each song, each act, corresponds to the parcels and letters. Someone has orchestrated this as a performance, with me as the subject and the audience. Yes, Miss Marple said, her voice calm. And the purpose of this orchestration is not punishment, but instruction, to illuminate conscience, provoke reflection, and reveal character. Yet the mind guiding these events remains unseen. Daphne Allerton appeared quietly, her gaze downcast. I created the initial room, but I did not send the secondary parcels, nor did I write the letters. That was someone else. Miss Marple regarded her thoughtfully. Indeed, Daphne. You acted on emotion and conscience. The second parcels, the letters, the observations, these belong to another mind, deliberate and patient, shaping the lesson with care. George Allerton's voice cut sharply through the tension. Who, then, could possess such subtlety? Who is capable of such precision without detection? Someone underestimated, Miss Marple said. Ordinary in appearance, yet extraordinary in perception. Their attention to detail and understanding of human behavior allows them to guide events without revealing themselves. Observe the consistencies, the timing, the psychological manipulations. They are the marks of intelligence. Cray adjusted his glasses. So the revelation depends on interpreting patterns, not catching the person in the act. Exactly, Miss Marple replied. Patterns reveal intention. Every deliberate placement, every timed action, every subtle manipulation leads to the orchestrator. Even the most careful manipulator leaves traces in the consistency of influence. The house seemed to hold its breath as Miss Marple paced the corridors. She noted the alignment of furniture, the subtle displacements of objects, and the minute hesitations in the household's movements. Each detail was a thread in the tapestry of orchestration, pointing to a mind that moved unseen but had directed every moral and psychological prompt. Outside, the snow fell steadily, muffling sound and lending an air of suspended reality. Inside, every glance, gesture, and movement became part of the ongoing tableau. The orchestrator's plan had been meticulous. The green door to provoke reflection, the first parcel to elicit acknowledgement, the second parcel to complete the moral lesson, and the letters to document and reinforce the observations. Mr. Derry, observing the items on the table, spoke quietly. I see now. The orchestration was meant to make me confront my failings, to acknowledge Clara Vane not as a memory, but as a presence demanding recognition. Exactly, Miss Marple said. And the second parcel and the letters were necessary to complete the moral instruction. The orchestrator did not seek recognition. They sought insight, reflection, and accountability. Cray closed his notebook. So we are looking for someone who watches, calculates, and manipulates subtly, whose presence is ordinary, yet whose influence is extraordinary. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Yes, Inspector, the orchestrator reveals themselves not through spectacle, but through consistency, subtle influence, and measured action. Every act, placement, and timing reflects an understanding of human behavior. The household moved through the late afternoon with quiet anticipation. The Allertons were restrained, Derry was reflective, Lucy was anxious, and Clegg maintained his usual authority. Each played their part in the drama, unknowingly participating in the final act designed to reveal the mind behind the mystery. Miss Marple, seated by the window, traced patterns in her mind. The orchestrator's plan was intricate. The staged room to provoke reflection, the first parcel to elicit acknowledgement, the second parcel to complete the lesson, and the letters to guide interpretation. Each element had been carefully timed, each reaction accounted for, each person's response measured. "The moment approaches," she murmured. "The final test, the ultimate observation, is imminent. The orchestrator has guided the sequence, measured responses, and now awaits the revelation of their own hand. The house, the people, and the objects themselves are witnesses to the subtle manipulation of conscience." As dusk fell, Miss Marple moved through the corridors, observing the alignment of furniture, the subtle shifts of objects, and the glances exchanged among the household. Each movement, each gesture, each minute detail was a clue in the unfolding pattern. She felt certain that the identity of the orchestrator would emerge, not through force, but through consistency, subtlety, and the careful shaping of events. The snow continued to fall outside, covering the grounds in a pristine white, masking tracks but revealing patterns to those who watched carefully. Within Gossington Lodge, the stage was set. The actors had played their parts, and the final act, the subtle psychological test that would reveal the orchestrator, was about to unfold. Miss Marple, ever observant, waited patiently, confident that the patterns, the careful measurements, and the consistent attention to human behavior would soon disclose the mind behind the mystery. The house settled into an uneasy silence as dusk deepened, the fading light catching the frost outside and glinting against the polished surfaces of Gossington Lodge. Miss Marple stood quietly in the library, observing the household with her usual calm vigilance. She had traced every detail of the events over the past days: the green door that appeared and vanished, the carefully staged room, the first and second parcels, the letters, the anchor brooch, and the diary of notes detailing observations of behavior. Each had played a deliberate role in the orchestration, yet the mind guiding these events remained unseen. Until now. Inspector Cray moved beside her, adjusting his notebook with a restless energy. "Miss Marple," he said, "I've reviewed the timeline, cross-referenced the servants' statements, and examined the physical evidence. It's clear that Daphne and the parcels played roles, but the real orchestrator is still a mystery. How do we draw them out?" Miss Marple's eyes scanned the library. "Observation, Inspector. One must consider the psychology at work. The orchestrator is patient, subtle, familiar with the house and its inhabitants, and clever enough to remain unnoticed while guiding events. They do not reveal themselves through clumsiness, rather through consistent influence and carefully measured acts." At that moment, Lucy entered, carrying a folded piece of paper she had discovered in the east corridor. Her hands trembled slightly. "Ma'am, I found this tucked behind the skirting board. I thought it might be important." Miss Marple took the paper carefully, unfolding it. The handwriting was precise, deliberate in its subtle hints, noting observations about movements, reactions, and timings of household members. The annotations suggested a methodical approach to recording and manipulating the sequence of events. She held it to the light, examining the fine, consistent ink stroke. "This confirms it," she murmured. "The orchestrator is someone who not only understands human behavior, but also records and anticipates it. They have guided each event to elicit reflection, to test conscience, and to measure responses, all without revealing themselves." Cray looked over her shoulder. The letters, the parcels, the diary, and now this note, they all point to the same hand. But who could it be? Who has the subtlety, the knowledge of the house, and the understanding of human nature to execute this? Miss Marple's gaze shifted across the room, settling on Clegg, the butler, who was arranging the tea service with his usual meticulousness. His movements were deliberate, unhurried, but always precise. "Consider," she said softly, "who moves unnoticed, yet is present in every area of the house, whose duties allow them access and observation. Someone who blends into the routine, yet can manipulate timing, placement, and attention without arousing suspicion." George Allerton spoke, his tone a mix of frustration and incredulity. Clegg, but he's a servant. How could he plan such an elaborate orchestration? Surely someone more influential. Miss Marple shook her head. Influence is not always measured by rank, George. Observation and understanding of human behavior are far more powerful. The person who orchestrates the events need only be able to move unnoticed, record carefully, and apply knowledge at the right moments. Often, the most ordinary-seeming person has extraordinary insight. Daphne entered quietly, her expression anxious. I did not anticipate this, she admitted. I arranged the first room, the first parcel. But the letters, the timing, the second parcel, the diary, that was someone else. I swear it. Miss Marple inclined her head. Indeed, Daphne, you acted on impulse and conscience. But the orchestrator has taken your actions and refined them, extending the lesson, guiding reactions, and measuring the results. Mr. Derry, who had been pacing near the window, turned toward them. His face was pale, and he seemed on the verge of revelation himself. Miss Marple, he said, the sequence of the parcels, the letters, the diary. It's as though someone wanted me to confront my past, to recognize Clara Vane not as a memory, but as a presence demanding acknowledgement. Exactly, Miss Marple said gently. The orchestrator's intent is moral, psychological, and deliberate. The room, the parcels, the letters, all were designed to guide your reflection, to create an understanding of past choices and responsibilities. The question remains, who is capable of such subtle orchestration? Cray interjected. We know the executor. The first parcel was Daphne's doing. We know the audience, you, Mr. Derry. But the composer, the mind directing the sequence, remains unknown. How do we draw them out? Miss Marple's eyes scanned the room again, taking in every subtle gesture, every shift in posture, every glance. She noted Clegg's careful placement of the tea tray, Lucy's nervous hovering near the corner, and Daphne's anxious fingers. And then her gaze fell on a figure often overlooked. Mrs. Weatherby, who had been quietly observing from the armchair near the window, her knitting abandoned, her eyes fixed intently on Derry. Her calm demeanor and seeming inconspicuousness had made her appear harmless, yet she had watched every interaction, every movement, every reaction with meticulous attention. "Inspector," she said softly, "observe Mrs. Weatherby. She is present but unassuming, yet she has noted everything. The handwriting, the placement, the sequence of events. These are consistent with the habits of someone who watches quietly, who blends into the background, yet influences events subtly." Cray looked from Miss Marple to Mrs. Weatherby, puzzled. "Are you suggesting she's the orchestrator?" "I am suggesting," Miss Marple said, "that she fits the profile, patient, intelligent, unnoticed, yet observant and capable of guiding events with foresight. The orchestrator leaves traces not through action alone, but through consistency, timing, and psychological influence. Every parcel, every letter, every note aligns with what she could have executed quietly, without arousing suspicion." Mrs. Weatherby's eyes widened and she shifted slightly, but her composure remained intact. I was only observing, ma'am. I thought it prudent to notice patterns, to be helpful." "Observation is not orchestration, my dear," Miss Marple replied. "But guidance can be subtle. You may have directed outcomes without direct action, allowing others' impulses to execute your design. It is not uncommon for those underestimated to wield influence in ways unnoticed." Mr. Derry stepped forward, his face a mix of relief and astonishment. "So, all this, the room, the parcels, the letters, it was meant to make me confront my conscience, orchestrated by someone who observed, guided, and tested without revealing themselves?" "Precisely," Miss Marple said. "And now, with patterns analyzed, reactions measured, and sequences understood, the orchestrator's hand is visible in retrospect. We see consistency, subtlety, and deliberate guidance. the hallmarks of the RPE. Hidden mind behind the moral lesson. Cray closed his notebook with a sigh, finally comprehending. It is brilliant, in a way. To orchestrate moral reflection without imposing, to remain unseen while guiding conscience, that requires extraordinary subtlety. Miss Marple smiled. Indeed, Inspector, it is less about power or authority than insight, patience, and understanding human nature. The orchestrator has guided events with precision, but without spectacle. Their identity is revealed not by overt action, but by the invisible hand shaping the course of reflection, the quiet test of conscience, and the careful measurement of response. The house seemed to relax, as if acknowledging that the pattern had been discerned. Outside, the snow softened under the evening light, muffling footsteps but revealing patterns to those who observed carefully. Within, the stage had been set, the actors had played their parts, and the final act, the subtle psychological test that had guided each participant's reflection, had been revealed. Miss Marple, seated calmly by the window, allowed herself a small smile. The orchestrator's identity, once hidden, was now apparent through the meticulous evidence of consistent observation, subtle guidance, and psychological understanding. The household, once fraught with uncertainty, now held the quiet knowledge of revelation, the tension easing as the truth emerged through the lens of human behavior rather than force or spectacle. The evening had deepened into a calm, almost reverential stillness at Gossington Lodge. Snow lay heavy on the grounds, softening every sound and lending a serene hush to the village outside. Yet inside the house, tension vibrated with quiet intensity. Miss Marple sat in the drawing-room, her knitting needles poised but unmoving, her mind tracing every step of the past days. The sudden appearance of the green door, the staged room, the first parcel, the second parcel, the letters, the anchor brooch, the notebook, and the subtle orchestration that had guided each reaction with careful precision. Everything had led to this final moment, the reveal of the mind behind it all. Inspector Cray leaned against the mantelpiece, his notebook closed, eyes alert but thoughtful. "Miss Marple," he began, "we have observed patterns, timing, responses, and influences. But now it is time. The orchestrator, whose hand has guided all of this, must be confronted. How do we proceed?" Miss Marple rose slowly, her movements graceful, her eyes sharp beneath the lace of her hair. "Observation has brought us to this point, Inspector. But confrontation is a subtle art. One must provoke recognition, allow the mind to reveal itself through reaction, and ensure that the evidence, both tangible and psychological, aligns to confirm identity. The orchestrator cannot hide forever, for their own consistency betrays them." Mr. Derry, who had been quietly seated, rose at her words. "So you know who it is?" he asked, his voice taut with anticipation. "Yes," Miss Marple said softly. "The person is present, unassuming, seemingly ordinary, yet extraordinarily perceptive. They have used the household, its routines, and our own responses as instruments to reveal conscience, provoke reflection, and deliver understanding. Their presence has been invisible, but the pattern, if one watches carefully, is undeniable." All eyes in the room turned toward Mrs. Weatherby, seated by the window, knitting abandoned in her lap. She looked faintly startled, yet composed. I was merely observing," she said, her voice steady, though a flicker of awareness crossed her features. "I noticed details, patterns. I wanted to help, not orchestrate anything." Miss Marple regarded her with calm intensity. "Exactly, my dear. Observation alone is benign, but guidance, subtle and deliberate, is orchestrated action. You have guided reactions, allowed events to unfold according to careful timing, and shaped outcomes without direct interference. That is the essence of orchestration. The hand remains unseen, but its influence is everywhere." Inspector Cray's eyes narrowed. Mrs. Weatherby, are you admitting to arranging the sequence of events, the parcels, the letters, the timing?" She shook her head slightly. "I did not place the parcels or write the letters. I observed patterns, made notes, and at times suggested actions. But the physical tasks Daphne carried out the second parcel was distributed under supervision. I was guiding, not executing." Miss Marple nodded. "Exactly. The orchestration is intellectual, not necessarily physical. You shaped behavior through observation and subtle influence. The physical acts were executed by others, but the design, the timing, the moral guidance, that was your domain." Mr. Derry stepped forward, his voice low, almost reverent. "So this has all been a test of my conscience, a staged moral reflection." "Yes," Miss Marple said gently. "The staged room, the parcels, the letters, all were intended to provoke reflection, to illuminate past errors, and to measure your response. The orchestrator has guided events so that conscience is confronted without force, yet with undeniable clarity." Daphne Allerton, who had previously admitted to the first parcel, looked anxious. "And I played my part in the execution. Does this make me complicit?" Miss Marple shook her head. "Not complicit, my dear, but an instrument. You acted with conscience and emotion, without realizing the full orchestration of which you were a part. The orchestrator is revealed by the consistency of influence, the patience, and the subtle manipulation, none of which was yours to direct." George Allerton, still looking skeptical, asked, "But why? Why go to such lengths? Why orchestrate all this when a simple conversation could have sufficed?" Miss Marple's gaze softened. "Sometimes, George, the ordinary conversation does not suffice. Human behavior is complex, and conscience is often clouded by habit, fear, or distraction. By orchestrating events carefully, the orchestrator created a situation in which reflection is unavoidable, attention is focused, and moral reckoning becomes inevitable. It is subtle, indirect, yet profoundly effective." Cray adjusted his spectacles. "So the moral lesson was embedded in the sequence of actions, the timing, and the psychological nudges, the parcels, the letters, the room, the handkerchief, the notebook." "Yes," Miss Marple replied. "Every element was deliberate. The green door provoked curiosity. The staged room created emotional engagement. The first parcel elicited initial reflection. The second parcel confirmed the lesson, and the letters and notebook documented responses and guided further insight. The orchestrator relied not on force or authority, but on understanding, foresight, and patience." Lucy, who had been quietly observing, whispered, "And all this to make Mr. Derry confront Clara Vane's memory." "Precisely, Lucy," Miss Marple said kindly. The orchestrator sought acknowledgement of responsibility, reflection upon past choices, and the moral alignment of conscience. The physical tasks were executed by others, but the mind guiding the sequence is revealed by the invisible hand shaping outcomes. Derry's voice was low, trembling slightly. "I see now. All of it, the parcels, the green door, the letters, it was meant to make me face what I ignored, to recognize my responsibilities, and to confront Clara Vane not as a distant memory, but as a presence demanding recognition." "Exactly," Miss Marple said, "and the orchestrator's brilliance lies in subtlety. They have revealed themselves not through action alone, but through consistent influence, careful timing, and understanding of human behavior. The lesson is embedded in the unfolding, not in spectacle." Cray exhaled, a mixture of relief and admiration in his expression. "It is extraordinary. To orchestrate moral reflection in such a way, without direct imposition, while remaining unnoticed, requires remarkable subtlety and intelligence." Miss Marple's gaze swept the room, noting the composed yet attentive faces of each participant. "Indeed, Inspector, the orchestrator remains underestimated precisely because they blend into the everyday. Their identity is revealed not by grand gestures, but by the meticulous shaping of events, the consistent patterns, and the subtle nudges that guided conscience and reflection. Mrs. Weatherby, who had remained composed, finally spoke. "So, all of this, the notes, the timing, the parcels, was my work?" "Your guidance, yes," Miss Marple said. "You observed with insight, nudged with subtlety, and allowed the natural behaviors of others to complete the orchestration. The execution was carried out by others, but the moral architecture, the shaping of awareness and reflection, was yours." Daphne, George, Lucy, and Mr. Derry all absorbed the explanation, the tension in the room slowly releasing as understanding dawned. The orchestrator's methods, once hidden in subtlety, had been uncovered through careful observation, attention to consistency, and analysis of psychological patterns. Miss Marple finally settled into her chair, knitting needles poised once more. And so, the moral lesson is complete. The orchestrator, while unseen in execution, has revealed themselves through design, influence, and patience. The audience has confronted conscience, the instruments have played their parts, and the patterns have disclosed the guiding mind. Outside, the snow continued to fall softly, muffling all sound and lending a serene hush to the world beyond the lodge. Inside, the household of Gossington Lodge held a quiet awareness of revelation and resolution. The green door, the parcels, the letters, and the orchestrated room had all served their purpose, and the subtle hand-guiding events had been recognized, not through spectacle, but through insight, patience, and understanding of human nature. Miss Marple, observing the peaceful scene, allowed herself a faint smile. The house, the participants, and the orchestrated events had revealed their truths. Conscience had been confronted, reflection had been provoked, and the subtle intelligence of the orchestrator was acknowledged and understood. As the evening deepened and the snow settled into quiet perfection, Gossington Lodge returned to its outward calm. Yet within, the moral and psychological threads woven over days remained, a testament to subtle observation, patient orchestration, and the enduring capacity of human conscience to recognize guidance, responsibility, and truth. Miss Marple, serene and composed, reflected once more on human nature. That the ordinary seeming can possess extraordinary insight, that subtle influence can guide moral awakening, and that patience, observation, and understanding of behavior can shape events more profoundly than force or direct action ever could.